The storm of grief. The fog clung to the earth like a heavy, oppressive blanket, casting a muted veil over the cemetery. Elena stepped out of her car, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Her boots sank into the soggy grass with each step, a soft squelch accompanying the sound of her footsteps. The world seemed eerily still, save for the occasional rustle of branches stirred by a cold breeze. It was as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something. Her hands gripped the umbrella tightly, though it did little to shield her from the damp that seeped into her skin. She had been here countless times, each visit marked by the same heavy, suffocating sadness. The weight of grief that had slowly, over the years, shaped her life, had become her constant companion. But today felt different. The cold bite of the wind seemed sharper, the dark sky pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. Her feet carried her to the farthest corner of the cemetery, where Michael's grave lay. She had buried him here, but sometimes it felt as though he were still miles away, unreachable. The grave itself was simple, just a flat stone with his name etched into it. Michael Harper. Beloved husband and father. The words had become so familiar over time, yet they still felt like a cruel mockery. How could a stone capture the life of a man who had been so much more to her than just a name? As Elena approached the grave, she paused for a moment, staring down at the earth that covered the body of the man who had once held her heart. The rain began to fall more heavily now, a light drizzle turning into a steady downpour. But it didn't matter. She had come here to feel something, to confront the emptiness that had consumed her since Michael's sudden death. But no matter how hard she tried, nothing could fill the gaping hole inside her. She bent down, placing a trembling hand on the wet stone. Her fingers lingered there, tracing the engraved letters, as if by touching them she could somehow summon him back. She had been unable to let go, unable to move past the grief. It had paralyzed her, wrapped its icy fingers around her chest and kept her tethered to the past. No matter how much time passed, no matter how much she tried to heal, the pain was always there, lurking beneath the surface. As she stood there in the rain, her mind began to drift, memories of Michael flooding her thoughts. Their life together, the way his smile could light up a room, the way he would hold her when the world seemed too much. Those moments now felt like fragile pieces of glass, broken and scattered across the floor of her heart. The loss had stolen those moments, shattered them into irretrievable fragments. She had been left with nothing but the emptiness of a life without him. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound, a rustle from somewhere behind her. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected anyone else to be here. This cemetery, tucked away in the quiet outskirts of town, was usually abandoned at this hour, especially with the rain falling so relentlessly. She turned slowly, her gaze scanning the area, and then she saw her. A young girl, no more than 10 or 11, was kneeling by Michael's grave. Her small hands were pressed into the damp earth, her shoulders shaking as she wept silently. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen this child before, yet there was something so hauntingly familiar about her. The girl's long, dark hair was matted to her face, wet from the rain, but it was her eyes that caught Elena's attention. They were wide and filled with sorrow, and yet there was something deeper in them, something that stirred a strange, unnameable feeling in Elena's chest. The girl didn't notice Elena at first, her focus completely on the grave before her. Her small hands trembled as they touched the cold stone, as if she were seeking something, comfort, perhaps, or some connection to the man whose name was etched into the rock. Elena watched, rooted to the spot, as the girl's sobs became more pronounced, her shoulders shaking violently with each breath. It was an odd thing, to see such a young child grieving at a grave, and yet Elena couldn't help but feel a wave of empathy. She wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but something held her back. The air between them seemed charged with an unseen tension, and for a moment, Elena couldn't quite place why. There was something about this child, something that was impossible to ignore. Unable to look away, Elena took a hesitant step forward. The umbrella she had been holding slipped from her hand and fell to the ground with a soft thud. The rain, now pouring down in sheets, soaked her completely, but she didn't care. Her eyes remained fixed on the girl. There was a question burning in her chest, an instinct she couldn't ignore. "Who are you?" Elena's voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if she were afraid to break the fragile stillness of the moment. The words felt foreign in her mouth, as though they didn't belong in this space. She wasn't sure why, but the question seemed to carry a weight she hadn't anticipated. The girl looked up, her tear-streaked face a mixture of confusion and fear. Her gaze met Elena's, and for a split second, it felt as though time stopped. There was something in that look, something achingly familiar. Elena's heart lurched in her chest as she tried to place it. Had she seen this girl before? The girl wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, the movement jerky and uncoordinated, as if the weight of her grief was too much to bear. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "This is my father's grave." She sniffled, her eyes filling with more tears. "Who are you?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Father?" Her mind raced. This couldn't be. Michael, her husband, had never spoken of having a child. He had never mentioned a daughter. But there was something about this girl, about the way she looked at Michael's grave, that made Elena's stomach twist with a growing sense of dread. The realization hit Elena like a bolt of lightning, sharp and painful. The girl's eyes, so familiar, now seemed to reflect the same pain that Elena had felt for years. And as Elena stood there, rooted to the spot, the words that had remained unspoken for so long rose to the surface. Who was this girl? Before Elena could respond, the girl spoke again, her voice small but desperate. "You're his wife, right? You're my mother too, aren't you? I've come to find you. I just wanted to see him again. I want to be with you." Elena's breath hitched in her chest. The world seemed to spin around her, the reality of the situation crashing down on her in waves. Mother? The word felt foreign, strange, and yet the girl's plea, her innocent hope, seemed to echo something deep within Elena's soul. But before Elena could process the overwhelming flood of emotions, her mind flashed to Michael, to the man she had loved and lost. Could this be possible? Could this child really be his daughter? A million thoughts raced through Elena's mind, each one more confusing than the last. She felt as though she were standing at the edge of a precipice, the ground beneath her feet unstable and crumbling. She had come here to mourn, to remember Michael, but instead, she found herself confronted with a truth she hadn't even known was possible. Elena took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest as the rain continued to pour down, cold and relentless. She needed answers. She needed to know the truth. But the question remained, could she handle it? The unthinkable revelation. Elena stood frozen in place, the weight of the girl's words hanging in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. "Father?" The word repeated in her mind like an echo, reverberating through the quiet, rain-drenched cemetery. The girl's tear-filled eyes seemed to hold an infinite sadness, a grief that mirrored Elena's own. But the revelation, that Michael, her husband, the man she had loved so deeply, could have a child that she knew nothing about, was too much to process. Elena's chest tightened, her breath quickening as a mix of disbelief and panic bubbled up inside her. She had known Michael for over a decade, and he had never once mentioned a child. Their life together had been built on shared moments, secrets kept between the two of them, but never this. Never a daughter. The realization sent a jolt through her, as if the ground beneath her feet had cracked open and she was tumbling into an abyss. This isn't possible, Elena thought, her mind rebelling against the idea. But as she stared at the girl, kneeling on the wet ground in front of Michael's grave, something inside her shifted. The girl's sorrow seemed to bleed into the very air around them, and the pain in her eyes was undeniable. Could she be telling the truth? Elena took a shaky step back, struggling to find her footing on the uneven ground. The umbrella she had dropped earlier lay abandoned in the mud, forgotten in the chaos of her thoughts. The rain was relentless now, drenching her completely, but she barely noticed the cold. All she could focus on was the girl, the child who claimed to be Michael's daughter. I don't understand. Elena's voice trembled as she spoke, her words barely above a whisper. How can this be? How did I never know about you? The girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand, the action almost childlike in its innocence. She looked up at Elena, her face softening with a hint of desperation. I'm not lying, she said, her voice cracking. I swear, I'm his daughter. My mother, she passed away when I was little. I grew up in an orphanage, but I always knew about my father. I wanted to meet him. To know him. I ran away to find him. To find you. The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut. An orphanage? Her thoughts swirled in a frenzy. How could Michael have had a child in secret? He had always been so guarded about his past, so closed off from the world outside their home. She had known him as a man of few words, someone who rarely spoke about anything that wasn't directly related to their life together. But this child, was something she had never even imagined. Why didn't he tell me? Elena's voice was low, barely audible as she whispered to herself, more than to the girl. Why didn't he tell me about you? The girl's shoulders shook, her tiny frame trembling under the weight of the rain and her own sorrow. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them as if to protect herself from the storm. Her voice, when it came, was small, vulnerable. I don't know. Maybe he was afraid. But I'm here now. I wanted to know him. To have a family. Elena's heart broke at the girl's words, but she couldn't bring herself to let go of the anger that simmered beneath her surface. She couldn't understand how Michael, her husband, the man who had promised her everything, could have kept such a secret from her. How could he have hidden this child from her all these years? The betrayal felt like a knife to the chest. Her vision blurred with unshed tears as memories of their life together flashed before her eyes, conversations they had shared, quiet evenings spent at home, their laughter echoing in the walls of their house. How could she have missed something so significant? How could she have been so blind? I don't know you, Elena said, her voice harsh and cold, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She took another step back, her hands trembling as she tried to gather her thoughts. I don't know what you want from me. The girl looked up at her, confusion flickering in her eyes, but there was something else there too, something Elena couldn't quite place. Was it hope? Was it desperation? Whatever it was, it made Elena feel smaller than she had ever felt in her life. I don't want anything from you, Lily whispered. I just want a family. Please, I don't have anyone. You're my only hope. Elena felt the words hit her like a wave, crashing into her chest and leaving her breathless. She stared at the girl, her heart in turmoil. How could she be so cold? How could she just turn this girl away when she was so clearly hurting? But at the same time, the anger inside her burned brighter, stronger. How could Michael have kept this from me? For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the rain pouring down around them, each woman trapped in her own thoughts. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to shout at the heavens for all the unfairness she had endured, for the lie that had been woven into the fabric of her life. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she felt a deep, suffocating sadness that threatened to overwhelm her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But when she opened them again, the girl was still there, still looking at her with those wide, pleading eyes. The girl who called Michael her father. The girl who wanted Elena to be her mother. A mother. The word seemed foreign to Elena now, as if it didn't belong to her. She had never imagined herself as a mother, not in the way that this girl needed. She had never thought about raising another child, especially one who wasn't even hers. And yet, as she looked at Lily, so young, so vulnerable, Elena felt a stirring deep within her, a pull she couldn't quite explain. What was she supposed to do? The quiet hum of her phone in her pocket interrupted her thoughts, and she fumbled to pull it out, eager for some distraction from the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. The screen lit up, flashing with a message from her bank. Overdue payments. Debt. Unpaid bills. Elena's heart sank, the reality of her financial struggles crashing into her already fragile state of mind. She had been trying to ignore the mounting bills ever since Michael passed, but it was impossible now. The weight of the debts was unbearable, a constant reminder of the life Michael had left her with. And now this. A child who might be hers to care for. A child whose future was uncertain, just like her own. Elena felt a strange, almost calculating thought creep into her mind. Maybe this is the answer. If she claims this girl as her daughter, I could get support payments. I could make this work. But as soon as the thought crossed her mind, Elena recoiled, disgusted with herself. Was she really considering using this girl for financial gain? Was she willing to sacrifice what little moral compass she had left just to survive? She looked back at Lily, who was still kneeling in the rain, her eyes fixed on Elena with an unwavering hope. It broke something inside Elena, something she hadn't realized was still there. Without realizing it, Elena took a step closer to Lily, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice shaking. The girl blinked in surprise, then whispered, "Lily. My name is Lily." And in that moment, Elena made a decision. One that would change everything. "I'll take you in," she said, her voice low but firm. "But you need to behave. Do you understand?" Lily's eyes widened with shock, then filled with something else, relief, gratitude, hope. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I understand." And just like that, Elena felt the weight of her choice settling on her shoulders, a burden that she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. But there was no turning back now. The weight of a decision. The car ride back from the cemetery was an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers cutting through the rain, it all felt distant, muffled, like a world Elena was no longer a part of. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, her fingers trembling slightly. The girl, Lily, sat in the passenger seat, her small frame curled up against the door, her gaze fixed on the window as the world blurred by in the downpour. Elena couldn't bring herself to look at her. How could she? The decision had been made in a split second, an impulsive choice driven by a rush of emotions that had overwhelmed her. But now, as the rain fell harder and the road stretched out before her, the weight of what she had just agreed to began to sink in. The reality of it was so much heavier than she had anticipated. She had taken a stranger into her home. A child who had just appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be Michael's daughter. A child who had come to find her. To find family. Elena couldn't wrap her mind around it. It was as though her whole world had been upended, turned inside out in a matter of moments, and she had no idea how to stitch it all back together. The car slowed as they approached the house, the familiar view of their front porch coming into sight. It looked the same as it always had, warm, inviting, the lights casting a soft glow through the curtains. But now, with Lily sitting beside her, it felt different. It felt alien, like a space that was no longer hers alone, a place that had been suddenly and irrevocably changed. Elena pulled into the driveway and parked the car, her mind racing with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers. She wanted to speak, to break the silence, but her voice seemed to have left her. She could feel the girl's eyes on her, waiting for some kind of guidance, some kind of reassurance. But Elena didn't have that. Not anymore. Lily hesitated for a moment before unbuckling her seatbelt and slowly stepping out of the car. She stood there for a second, staring at the house, her expression unreadable. Elena got out of the car after her, her feet squelching in the wet grass as she walked up to the porch. Her mind kept replaying the scene at the cemetery, the sight of Lily's tear-streaked face, her desperate plea for a family, for belonging. The intensity of the girl's sorrow had cut through Elena's defenses, and despite her confusion and anger, a part of her couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for her. As Elena unlocked the door and stepped inside, she was struck by the emptiness of the house. It was a home that had once been filled with the laughter of children, the hum of daily life, the shared moments between her and Michael. But now, it was silent. The walls felt cold. The memories of their life together haunted every corner, and yet, they were now a distant echo. How could she fill this silence? How could she make space for a child who had suddenly appeared in the wreckage of her life? "Come in," Elena said, her voice strained. She tried to sound reassuring, but it came out more like an order. Lily stepped inside, her small body barely making a sound as she moved through the threshold. The house smelled the same, a mixture of old wood and fresh linens. But it didn't feel like home anymore. Not with Lily there. Not with the weight of the past pressing down on her every thought. Elena led her into the living room, a place where she had spent countless hours with Michael. But now, the room seemed unfamiliar. It was as though it had been transformed by Lily's presence, reshaped into something else entirely. Elena gestured toward the couch, still unsure of how to proceed. "You can sit there," she said, almost mechanically. She noticed Lily's hesitance, the way her small hands fidgeted in front of her, as if she were waiting for something, an invitation, perhaps, or some kind of acknowledgement. "I'll get you something to eat," Elena said, needing to do something, anything, to fill the silence, to ground herself in some semblance of normalcy. She walked to the kitchen, the cold tile floor beneath her feet sending a chill up her spine. As she opened the fridge, her mind raced again, the overwhelming wave of uncertainty and guilt threatening to pull her under. What was she doing? Why had she agreed to this? How could she be so naive as to think she could just take this girl in and make everything work? She had no idea what she was supposed to do. There were no instructions for this kind of thing. Parenting, motherhood, those were words she had never imagined for herself, not in this way, not with a child who wasn't even hers. But there Lily was, sitting in her living room, looking at her with eyes full of hope and pain, and Elena couldn't bring herself to turn her away. Couldn't bring herself to break the fragile trust that had been extended to her. As Elena rummaged through the fridge, her hands shaking slightly, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Lily standing in the doorway of the kitchen, her eyes hesitant but hopeful. Can I help?" Lily asked, her voice small, almost shy. Elena paused, surprised by the question. The girl had been so quiet, so distant since they had arrived. It was as though she didn't know how to act in this new, strange environment. Elena could relate. She didn't know how to act, either. Sure," Elena replied, her voice uncertain. She gestured to the counter where a loaf of bread sat beside a jar of peanut butter. "You can spread this on the bread." Lily nodded and moved to the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she spread the peanut butter. Elena watched her, unable to shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at her insides. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't know what she was doing. As the silence stretched between them, Elena realized that the next step was inevitable. She had made a choice, and now, she had to follow through with it. She had to be a mother to this girl, whether she was ready or not. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her chest, threatening to crush her. "I don't know what to do," Elena whispered, more to herself than to Lily. She turned away, her voice breaking with the strain of it all. "I never thought I'd be in this position. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know how to care for you. Lily was silent for a long moment, and Elena turned back to find the girl standing there, her eyes soft, her expression not one of judgment but of quiet understanding. You don't have to know everything right now, Lily said gently. We can learn together. We can figure it out. For a moment, Elena just stared at her, the quiet sincerity in Lily's words sinking deep into her heart. She hadn't expected that. She had expected anger, resentment, or even more questions about why she had taken so long to accept her. But instead, there was kindness, a willingness to start anew, to heal, even in the midst of all the uncertainty. Elena took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle a little more comfortably within her. She hadn't expected to feel a connection to this child, this stranger who had come from the ashes of her past. But maybe that was what it was going to take, to learn together. To find a way forward, even when the past had left so many unanswered questions in its wake. As they sat down to eat together, Elena knew that this was just the beginning. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't even have a plan. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of something, a flicker of hope, no matter how faint, that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The struggle within. The days that followed were a blur of adjustment, each one passing in a haze of uncertainty. Elena had never imagined herself in this role, and yet here she was, responsible for a child who claimed to be the daughter of her late husband, a girl whose sudden appearance had turned her life upside down. At first, everything felt like an intrusion. Lily's presence in the house was a constant reminder of the grief Elena had been trying to bury since Michael's death. The quiet, once comfortable, was now filled with a quiet tension. Elena could hear the soft shuffle of Lily's footsteps in the hallway, the faint murmur of her voice when she spoke to herself or to the old family photos that lined the walls. The house, once a home shared by two, now echoed with the silence of their unspoken words, both women uncertain of how to bridge the gap that now lay between them. Elena had kept herself busy with work, meetings, deadlines, emails, anything to escape the mounting pressure she felt at home. The house had become a place she no longer recognized, and the idea of trying to rebuild something with Lily, something that might resemble a family, felt insurmountable. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, she couldn't escape the guilt. It was in the quiet moments, when she returned from work or when she sat alone at the kitchen table, that it struck her hardest. The girl, Lily, had nowhere else to go. There was no one else to take care of her. No other family. And though Elena's mind screamed at her to send Lily away, to turn her back to the streets or to the orphanage from which she had come, her heart whispered something else entirely. But it wasn't easy. One evening, a week after Lily had arrived, Elena came home to find the house unusually still. The front door was ajar, a soft breeze ruffling the curtains inside. Lily wasn't in the living room, where she normally sat reading or watching TV. Panic fluttered in Elena's chest. She called out, her voice thin in the quiet of the house. Lily? The silence was broken only by the faint sound of something metallic clattering in the kitchen. Elena rushed towards the noise, heart pounding. She found Lily standing at the counter, a plate in front of her. Her small hands were trembling as she poured something from a jar, her brow furrowed in concentration. I'm sorry, Lily said quickly, turning around with a guilty expression. I didn't mean to. It's okay, Elena interrupted, taking a deep breath. What are you doing? Lily held up a jar of peanut butter in one hand and a loaf of bread in the other. Her face flushed with embarrassment. I was trying to make dinner. I know I'm not very good at it, but I thought maybe it would help. I know you've been working so hard. Elena's heart clenched at the sight of Lily's awkward attempt to take care of herself, to take care of her. The small, childlike gesture caught Elena off guard. She had assumed that Lily's dependence on her would be immediate, that the girl would be a constant reminder of the loss and betrayal Elena felt. But instead, there was a fragility to Lily, an uncertainty that mirrored Elena's own. She was only a child. How could she possibly understand the complexity of the situation she had been thrown into? Elena walked over and gently placed her hand on Lily's shoulder. "You don't need to do this, sweetie," she said softly, trying to ignore the lump that had formed in her throat. "I'm just glad you're here." Lily's eyes glistened with something like relief, a quiet joy that made Elena's chest tighten. She was trying. She was trying. But Elena's heart felt conflicted. Was this fair to the girl? Was it fair to either of them? The more time passed, the more Elena felt trapped by the weight of her decision. The guilt of taking Lily in, of pretending to be the mother that the girl desperately wanted, gnawed at her from the inside out. Elena had never asked for this. She had never signed up for motherhood, not like this, not in the face of such pain. And then there were the moments when the questions overwhelmed her. Had Michael known about Lily? Why hadn't he told her? It was hard for Elena to even think about the possibility of Michael having kept such a huge part of his life from her. But the more she thought about it, the more she had to admit that she hadn't known everything about him. Their marriage, though full of love, had been marked by unspoken boundaries, secrets left hidden beneath the surface. Elena had always known that Michael wasn't perfect. He had his flaws, his moments of quiet, distant sorrow that she had never fully understood. But she had trusted him. She had trusted him with everything. How could he have kept a secret like this from her? "Hey," Elena finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "How about we sit down and eat together? I'll help you." Lily's face lit up, her eyes shining with something like hope. Elena could feel the weight of the girl's gaze on her, and for the first time in days, she felt something stir inside her, something soft, something warm. Maybe this wasn't as impossible as she had thought. The two of them sat together at the kitchen table, sharing the simple meal that Lily had made, neither of them saying much. The evening passed in quiet companionship, with only the soft clink of cutlery and the hum of the refrigerator breaking the stillness. Elena couldn't remember the last time she had shared a meal with someone in such a peaceful, unspoken way. The simple act of eating together, of just being in the same room without the weight of words, felt like a small victory. But there were still the moments when the reality of their situation would press down on Elena. She had to be strong for Lily, even if she wasn't sure how to do it. Even if she wasn't sure if she could. As the evening wore on, Lily went to bed early, a habit she had developed after spending years in an orphanage. Elena cleaned up the kitchen, her hands working automatically, her mind racing. She could hear the soft sound of Lily's breathing through the walls, the quiet rhythm of the girl's sleep. The house felt strange, still and heavy, as if it were waiting for something to happen, waiting for Elena to make a decision she didn't know how to make. Elena couldn't help but wonder what Lily would do if she hadn't made that impulsive choice to take her in. What would have happened to the girl? Where would she have gone? The thought haunted Elena, filling her with a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? She had opened her door, offered the one thing she had to give, the faintest semblance of a family. But that was just it. What did she have left to offer? She sat down on the couch, her thoughts whirling, the questions endless. Was this really the life she had imagined for herself? Was this what Michael would have wanted for his daughter? As the rain continued to beat against the windows, Elena let herself drift into thought, allowing herself the quiet space to think about all the things she still had to figure out. One thing was clear, this wasn't just about her anymore. The echo of unspoken words. The days began to blur into weeks. For Elena, time had become a quiet stream, one that moved too quickly and yet dragged on with the weight of every unanswered question hanging in the air. She had slowly started to adjust to Lily's presence in the house, but the undercurrent of tension never fully dissipated. It was as if they were both living in limbo, neither of them able to move forward, but both unwilling to retreat. Elena had come to realize that Lily wasn't simply a child who had wandered into her life by mistake. She was a girl with a past that Elena had never imagined she would have to deal with. In the evenings, when the house settled into the kind of quiet that only night could bring, Elena would often hear Lily crying softly in her room. It was as though the girl's sorrow, once so tightly held in, had found its release, and Elena wasn't sure how to help her bear it. Some nights, when the house was dark and still, Elena would sneak to Lily's door, standing just outside, her hand pressed against the wood as if she could somehow reach through it and hold the girl in her arms. But each time, she hesitated, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to offer comfort when she, herself, had never known real solace. The thought of telling Lily that everything would be okay felt hollow. How could she promise that? The world had never been kind to them. Yet, every morning, Elena would push aside the knot of unease in her chest and act like everything was fine. She made breakfast, packed lunches, and checked in on Lily's schoolwork, acting like a mother would, though it still felt foreign to her. It was an act of survival, a way to navigate a life that had become increasingly difficult to manage. She still had her job to focus on, her responsibilities, and that relentless sense of obligation to her late husband's memory that clung to every decision she made. But what about Lily? What about the girl who had come to her, not just as an orphan, but as her daughter's sister? As time went on, it became painfully clear that Lily wasn't just Michael's daughter, she was someone who had been left to drift, to fend for herself in the coldest corners of the world. Her life had been marked by loss and abandonment, and no matter how hard Elena tried to make her feel at home, that ache never seemed to fade. Lily was more than just a reminder of Michael's secrets, she was a mirror to Elena's own grief, a reflection of everything that had been left unsaid. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, Elena came home to find the house quieter than usual. There was no sound of Lily's footsteps, no soft hum of the TV playing in the background. A strange stillness filled the air, and for a brief moment, Elena felt a pang of worry in her chest. She walked through the house, calling Lily's name in a soft voice, but there was no answer. She turned down the hallway and found Lily standing at the window, staring out at the rain. The girl's back was to Elena, and she was so still that Elena almost wondered if she had somehow disappeared into the night. "Lily?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily didn't turn around at first. The only sign that she had heard was the subtle shift in her shoulders, the way she drew a slow, deliberate breath. It took a moment before she spoke, her voice heavy with something Elena couldn't quite identify. "I've been thinking a lot," Lily said, her tone distant, as though she were speaking to herself more than to Elena. About him. About Dad." Elena froze, the words hitting her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't heard Lily mention Michael directly in days, and the mention of his name pulled her into a space she had been trying to avoid. She couldn't bear to face those memories, not yet. But Lily's vulnerability, her raw honesty, made Elena realize she had no choice but to confront it, to be present for the girl who had entrusted her with this fragile piece of her past. "I know he's gone," Lily continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But I miss him. I miss everything about him, his laugh, the way he would hold me when I was scared, how he always made everything seem like it would be okay. I don't know what to do with all this emptiness." Elena swallowed hard, her throat closing. She didn't know how to respond. What could she say to that? She had always believed in her own strength, in her ability to hold it together, but hearing Lily speak so openly about the father Elena had loved, it cracked something deep inside her. "I miss him too," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. She hadn't meant to say it aloud, hadn't meant to expose her own feelings of loss, but the words came anyway, tumbling out of her like a dam that had finally burst. "Every day." Lily turned around, her face streaked with tears, her eyes searching Elena's as though she were looking for something, some sign of reassurance, perhaps, or a reflection of her own pain. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the silence was suffocating, but it was also strangely comforting. They were both grieving, both lost in different ways, and in that moment, they found something, an unspoken understanding, a shared sorrow. "I don't know how to be what you need," Elena whispered, her heart heavy with the admission. "I don't know how to be your mother." Lily's gaze softened, and for the first time in weeks, Elena saw something that resembled hope in the girl's eyes. "You don't have to know everything," Lily said quietly, her voice gentle. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here. I just need you to try." Elena closed her eyes, the weight of those words sinking deep into her chest. She hadn't realized until that moment just how much she had been holding back, not just from Lily, but from herself. She had been so caught up in her own grief, in her own fears and doubts, that she had forgotten the most important thing, to be present. She walked over to Lily, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out and gently pulled the girl into an embrace. It wasn't the perfect hug, it wasn't anything dramatic, but it was enough. Elena held Lily tight, feeling the girl's small body tremble against hers. The tears that had been building up inside of Elena for so long finally found their release, and she let them flow freely, not caring that she was crying in front of the girl who had come into her life so suddenly, so unexpectedly. For the first time since Lily had arrived, Elena allowed herself to break down. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to show the cracks in her own heart that had been hidden away for so long. And in that moment, as Lily clung to her, Elena realized something: maybe they didn't need to know how to be perfect. They didn't need to figure it all out at once. They just needed to be there for each other, to lean on each other when the weight of the world felt too heavy. As the rain continued to fall outside, Elena whispered softly into Lily's ear, "I'm here. I'm here for you. And I'll keep trying. I promise." Lily nodded, her small hands clutching the front of Elena's shirt, her face buried in Elena's shoulder. And for the first time in a long while, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this. Together. The path forward. The days stretched on, and with each passing moment, Elena felt the gradual, quiet shift within herself. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough to notice. The house no longer felt like a hollow shell, and her heart no longer echoed only with the weight of grief. She and Lily had, in their own way, started to build something, a fragile but real connection, one that seemed to take root in moments like these, when they allowed themselves to be honest with each other. It wasn't always easy, though. There were still nights when the silence between them felt thick and uncomfortable, and days when Elena would catch herself retreating into old habits of isolation, as though closing off her heart could protect it from further damage. There were moments when Lily would look at her with those searching eyes, waiting for the reassurance that Elena didn't know how to give. But there were other moments too. Small victories, fleeting instances where Elena would catch a glimpse of the girl she was slowly starting to understand. It wasn't just Lily's need for a mother that Elena had come to recognize, it was Lily's need for herself. The girl wasn't just an extension of Michael's past, and she wasn't just a broken child who had lost everything. She was someone who was starting to find her own voice, to shape her own identity, despite everything that had been taken from her. One morning, Elena woke to find Lily in the kitchen, her small hands gripping the edge of the counter as she stared down at a bowl of cereal. The girl's face was pale, her eyes distant, and Elena immediately sensed that something was off. "Hey, you okay?" Elena asked gently, her voice soft but concerned. She could see the way Lily's shoulders were hunched, the tension radiating from her, and it worried her. Lily didn't look up. She just nodded, but it was a half-hearted gesture. "I'm fine." Elena knew that wasn't true. She didn't push, though. Instead, she busied herself with making coffee, giving Lily space but keeping an eye on her. She had learned, over time, that pushing Lily too hard never helped. The girl needed room to open up on her own, and that was something Elena hadn't fully understood until recently. After a long silence, Lily finally spoke, her voice small and shaky. I had a dream last night. About Dad. Elena's heart tightened. She could feel the rawness in Lily's voice, the tenderness of a wound that hadn't fully healed. Without thinking, Elena moved toward her, pulling out a chair and sitting beside her at the table. Do you want to talk about it? Elena asked softly, her voice steady and reassuring. Lily hesitated, looking down at the bowl in front of her as if the words were stuck inside, unable to break free. But eventually, she met Elena's eyes, her expression vulnerable, as though she were searching for something in Elena's gaze, a safety net to catch her. I saw him. In the dream. He was happy. And he was holding me, like he used to. And then, Lily paused, her voice faltering, then he said that I had to stay with you now. That you'd take care of me. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The thought of Michael, of the man she had once loved, still holding some kind of power over them, filled her with a bittersweet sorrow. She had thought she had let go of him, that she had buried the pain of losing him in order to survive. But hearing Lily speak of him in this way, hearing her recount the dream as though it were a message, brought a flood of memories rushing back, memories of a love that was now buried under layers of hurt and betrayal. I'm not like him, Elena said softly, her voice trembling slightly. She wasn't sure why she said it. Perhaps it was the raw honesty in Lily's words that made her feel the need to clarify. I don't know how to be what he wanted me to be. I don't know how to be the perfect mother. But I can try, Lily. I can try. Lily's eyes flickered with something like understanding, and for the first time, Elena saw a glimmer of something more in the girl's expression. It wasn't just pain or sorrow, it was a quiet acceptance, an understanding that, despite everything, they were both doing the best they could with what they had. The days that followed weren't perfect. They never could be. But they were better than the days before. As they spent more time together, Elena started to see a change in Lily, a subtle shift from the broken child she had once been to someone who was slowly starting to rebuild herself. There were still tears, of course, and moments of deep sadness. But there was also laughter, quiet, tentative laughter that Elena hadn't heard in a long time. One evening, after dinner, the two of them sat together on the couch, watching an old movie that had always been one of Elena's favorites. Lily, though initially hesitant, was starting to enjoy it too. She was leaning against Elena, her small hand resting in the older woman's, her head gently on Elena's shoulder. For the first time, Elena didn't feel like an imposter. She didn't feel like she was pretending to be a mother, pretending to know how to navigate this strange, unfamiliar world of shared grief and healing. Instead, she just felt present, in the moment, with this girl who had somehow become a part of her life, and who, despite everything, was becoming a part of her heart. I know you miss him, Lily said quietly, her voice soft and steady as she looked up at Elena. I can tell. I can tell that you're still sad about him. Elena swallowed, her chest tightening at the words. She didn't say anything at first, simply holding onto Lily's hand a little tighter. I do miss him, Elena finally admitted. I miss him every day. Lily nodded, her gaze distant. I do too. But I think he'd want us to be okay, you know? He wouldn't want us to be sad forever. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Elena hadn't fully understood until now. In that moment, it hit her, Lily wasn't just a reflection of Michael's past. She was her own person, with her own future to shape. She didn't need to carry the burden of his memory alone. Elena realized, then, that they didn't need to fix everything at once. They didn't need to have all the answers. What mattered was that they were together, that they were moving forward one step at a time. The next morning, when Elena woke, the light in the house seemed different. The air was fresher, less heavy. It was as if something had shifted overnight, as if the world had exhaled, and they had both been allowed to breathe again. Lily was already up, standing by the window, looking out at the quiet world outside. Elena walked up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder, and for a moment, they simply stood there, side by side. Ready to face the day? Elena asked, her voice light. Lily turned to her, her face softening into a small smile. Yeah, she said. I think I am. And for the first time in a long time, Elena believed it.